guys, I'm Emily Roberson, author of Lifestyles of Gods and Monsters, and I'm doing a series of the creative questions that I've asked myself. And today, my question is, how do I let myself be critiqued, and how do I give critique? Because this is super hard. Okay, I did another video about how to find a critique group. So let's assume that you have done that. You have found a group of people, or maybe just one person, to read your work, and you're going to read their work, and then you're going to make changes to your work based on what they say, which is super hard. It just is. Okay, so the first thing to understand about critique is it's reciprocal. It's reciprocal. You are giving something to your critique partner. They are giving something to you. You're in a reciprocal relationship. And so you are going to do your very best. You're going to put aside all your jealousy. You're going to put aside that feeling that like, how did they make something so good when I suck? You're going to take all those feelings and you're going to put them in a box and you're going to put them away. Because right now you are trying to look at their work. And so what I really want you to understand when you go into it is you need to ask them, what are your goals for this? Because sometimes people want you to read their stuff, and really what they want for you to do is to say, you are amazing. And sometimes that's what you need too. You are amazing. Look at verbs. Look at your verbs. You're so great. You know, if you're making pastels like my mother, look at your color sense. It's wonderful. Like sometimes that's really what you need. It really is, and that's totally okay. I mean, I have a critique group, and sometimes I bring them things, and all I want to know is, am I on the right track? Am I on the right track? Okay, so the next thing is maybe somebody wonders if their story is going in the right direction. And so when you read their work, really focus on that. You know, is it going in the right direction? Or, you know, if you're looking at what they made, is it doing what they wanted it to do? Not, is it doing what I would do if I was in their shoes? Is it doing what they want it to do? That's the key question. And in the same way, you want to know, sitting down with the people who you are asking to critique you, what you're asking them, the same questions. Does this do what I'm trying to get it to do? So you've identified that, you've worked with the person, you've asked them the questions, and they're asking you questions. Okay, so when you receive critique, there's several ways it can happen. It can either be, you know, in person, or in my case with my critique group, you know, on the telephone, or it can be in paper, written to you, or basically those are the two ways. So, you know, let's assume you got their critique back. You're going to have a couple responses. The first one is going to be a version of like, yes, absolutely, you're right. I didn't think through that well enough. The second one is going to be some version of no, they're wrong. No. Okay. When you meet that no, there's two possible things that it could be. The first one is really honestly, yeah, they didn't get what you were trying to do. You don't really need to listen to it. The second one is that they're right, but it's really hard and you don't want to fix it. That's two really different things. And so it's really easy to focus on those ones where it's just like a no, I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. I will give you an example. When I was in taking this class in Boston that I love, that I've told you guys before about at Leslie. So I was writing this Southern thriller, which someday will be a book, and I just have to figure out how to make that happen. And one of the men in our class said, people don't eat potato salad with barbecue. My scene was set at a barbecue, and they said, people don't eat potato salad at barbecue. Well, yeah, they do. I'm from Arkansas. People from Arkansas eat potato salad at barbecues. Also, I think he meant a barbecue in the sense of like making hamburgers, and I was talking about like pork. So that's a whole other thing. But that's a case where like I didn't even need to look at that question. I didn't need to explain how people eat barbecue. I didn't need to do any of that. But because this was early in my career, I spent a lot of time, on those kinds of questions, defending myself or deciding whether to explain them. And I really had a harder time addressing the things that were more big picture. Like the fact that the book doesn't have a protagonist, which I didn't figure out until I was trying to write queries for it and realized you can't write a query when you don't have a protagonist. So somehow I missed all of the questions about that, which I'm sure people were asking, but were so big I couldn't quite get my arms around them. So here's another temptation when you are either being critiqued or taking critique from someone else. And that is to talk about the market and what's selling and, the sort of things like, you always hear stories about this in Hollywood, but the idea that like, could you add some vampires to this? And, oftentimes, maybe if you're in a meeting with a executive, you could consider that. But like, if you're just meeting with a bunch of other aspiring creative people, like they don't know any more than you do. So you don't need to worry about those vampire related questions. Also, adverbs. This is a writing specific one. Adverbs. People will tag you for using too many adverbs. I personally believe that the adverb is a perfectly respectable part of speech and we should be able to use it as much as we like. But also, that's not really what you're there for, right? Like you're there to figure out if your story is working. And, we can all call out lots of things that were bestsellers that are full of adverbs. People don't put a book down because of adverbs. They put a book down because the story isn't working, because the characters aren't grabbing their attention, or because the setting is unclear. These are all the things you're hoping to get out of critique. And sometimes I think people, I think it's kind of lazy actually, but sometimes people will focus all on misspellings or other, what I would call like ticky-tacky things rather than the whole of the work. And I think that's often because they didn't take the time to really read it carefully and they're sort of copy editing. And there's a reason that when you're writing a book for a publisher that copy editing is the last thing. Like that, you don't need to copy edit a scene that doesn't even need to be there. Like the question is like, is the scene serving your story? And that's how your critique partners can really help you. A critique partner is there, in my opinion, to tell you something isn't working, not to tell you how to fix it. And that's part two that I'll say is that nobody knows how to fix your work but you. But lots of people can tell you when it's not working, and then it's back on you to accept that and to move forward. And if you are having to explain something to someone, that means it's not on the page. It's not there. Your work has to stand on its own, and that is what a critique partner is bringing to you. If you play a song for someone and then when it gets over, you have to explain what the song meant, it didn't do the work on the page. It didn't do the work in the music. Okay, so to finish up my video about how to manage giving critique and being critiqued, I have several really important notes for you guys. The first is to remember throughout this, like really you want to keep a big old heart of generosity, as much generosity as you can manage, both for your own work and for the other person's work. But sometimes you realize it just isn't working. It just isn't working. You have given critique to someone and maybe they're getting very upset, or maybe you've received critique and it just feels mean. There is no shame in ending this relationship, this critique relationship. And I'll give you a few situations where I feel like that is probably your best choice. Okay, so one of the biggest ones is when you realize that jealousy is causing a problem. I'm making a whole other video about jealousy and fear of missing out and how it can be toxic to artistic friendships, but it really can be, and it can show up in this critique relationship. I'll lead with the one that makes us feel better, because it seems like the way to lead. Sometimes you're in an artistic critique relationship with someone and you realize that their jealousy is really causing significant problems. Their critique feels
nasty or mean, or they say things that aren't related to the work that are sort of like, well, just any mean things. And you can feel it's coming from a place of jealousy. Well, here's the problem. If you're like me and you really care about what other people think, it can be sorely tempting to downplay your own achievements so that that other person doesn't feel bad. In general, I don't think that's the best way to be, but it sure as heck is not the best way to be in this artistic life. Because here's the thing about our creative life. This is like the most important thing. You don't want to be an asshole. You don't want to be an egoist, but you have to believe in your own work. You have to want this. You have to want this more than anybody else wants this, because otherwise it's just too hard. So if you're finding yourself sort of like, maybe not showing your best work or not putting your best foot forward because you're afraid of hurting someone's feelings, that relationship could really just transition to a friendship, or maybe to, you call somebody once a year, or a Facebook friendship, but it definitely doesn't need to be an artistic partnership critique relationship anymore. Then there's also the flip side of this. I'm going to make a whole video about jealousy and how hard it is, but it is really hard. And sometimes the person who is jealous is you. Sometimes the person who is jealous is yourself. And so if you realize that you cannot look at someone's work honestly because you are jealous, it is time to say, hey, I think we need to take a break from critiquing. You don't have to tell them it's because you're jealous, although you can, but it's not fair to that person to bring your baggage and jealousy into reading their work. And when you find yourself, adding things to people's work or coming at things from a nasty place, like, it's time to break that relationship off, at least as it's been constituted. Here's another thing that can happen that can end your critique group: becoming too good of friends, and then you just chit chat the whole time and you don't talk about your work. That becomes something totally different. And so you can either course correct, or you can just say, like, now we're a group of people who chit chat about our work. Totally legitimately allowed. You could become a society of people who like to eat lunch and talk about your work, but you're no longer critique partners, because that is really different. Here's another time when you might need to make a change. Did someone start making something in a genre you either don't like or don't understand? If we are writing classical music and suddenly somebody decides to start making pop music, if I don't understand or like pop music, if I don't have a sense about its rules, the rules that you can break, if I don't have a technical sense of it, I have no business critiquing it. In the same way that if I was to, write a fantasy novel, which I haven't, but I might at some point, I love them. They are quite long. Somebody who's reading it needs to understand fantasy novels. They need to understand the genre. They need to understand what's happened before. They need to understand what's going on right now. Because otherwise you can end up with somebody saying, oh, this book is far too long, when some of the most successful fantasy novels are 300,000 or 400,000 words long. And so if one of your critique partners starts going in a direction that you do not understand, it is the biggest gift to them and to yourself to stop critiquing their work. You can still appreciate their work. You can still love their work. You can still like them as a person, but you shouldn't be critiquing it if you don't have at least a general knowledge of what they're trying to do. Okay, so the last reason that you can stop being critique partners with someone, start sharing, is if they've decided to quit. I have a whole video about whether or not it's time to quit. But I have a very dear friend who I used to share work with, and she may come back to writing at some point, but right now she's not a writer anymore. And so maybe she would want to read my work, but she has a whole other life now. Like, she's not doing this anymore. And so we can still have a friendship, but maybe our critique relationship either changes or ends, because when you change directions in your life to where you have a new thing going on, you no longer have all that time to read and critique someone else's work. So, and the same thing might happen to you. So be prepared for that. So that is my video all about the act of being critiqued. If you have any other questions about critique, I have a video about how to find a critique partner. But if you have other questions, make sure to ask them in the comments and I will see if I can make a video to address it. Okay, thanks. Bye.